This podcast is brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tires, batteries, and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. Thanks for downloading the McKay interview, which was recorded on the 5th of October 2024. My guest is Charles C. Adams, formerly a U.S. ambassador to Finland, and in his professional life, senior partner and director of strategic relationships at Orric, Harrington and Sutcliffe, a prominent American law firm. Charles is based in Geneva. We discuss the imminent U.S. presidential election, including, among other things, his prediction of the result, his views on the appeal of Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, and why the votes of the Electoral College are so vitally important. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello everyone. It's presidential election season in the USA. The 5th of November comes into view. Today is the 5th of October 2024, and the world's richest and most powerful democracy will soon go to the polls to elect its president for the next 4 years, its commander-in-chief and head of the executive branch of government. Over the next few weeks, I'll be explaining and examining the American political scene with the help of three American friends of mine, known to some of you listening in today. One of them is a Democrat, the other a Republican, and the third a political scientist and academic. I need their help because I'm neither American nor expert in this field, as you know. My first guest is Charles C. Adams, Jr., formerly a U.S. ambassador to Finland, and in his professional life, global director of strategic relationships at the law firm of Orric, Harrington and Sutcliffe. It's a prominent American law firm. Charles is based in Geneva, has been on my show before, and is an old friend. Hello, Charles. Thanks for inviting me to your home for this conversation. It's really good to see you again.
Michael, good morning. It's nice to have you here.
Charles, get straight into our conversation. Please describe your relationship with the Democratic Party.
Well, for about 40 years, I've been a member of the National Finance Committee of the Democratic National Committee. And I've been involved in fundraising on behalf of the DNC and Democratic candidates in the community of some 9 million Americans living outside of the U.S.
9 million Americans living abroad?
Yes, wow. 9 million Americans living outside of the U.S. on a permanent basis, excluding military. And these are Americans who, by and large, are thought to be primarily of Democratic persuasion.
Is that the case? Yeah.
We estimate roughly 75 to 80% are likely to be Democrats rather than Republicans.
I see.
And so this is a rich source for both parties, actually, of not only fundraising, but also registration and voting.
I can understand that. From what I read and from what I see on television, it seems that the result of the presidential race is still too close to call, even with just 4 weeks to go. And as many of those listening to us right now will not be Americans nor voters on the 5th of November, please give us a snapshot, just a brief snapshot, of how voting intentions look across the United States, West Coast, Big Middle, East Coast, and swing states as of today.
Well, the only way one can determine that is either by looking at the polling data from day to day, or perhaps more reliably at the bookmakers' odds in Las Vegas.
Well, what do you do? What's your feeling?
My sense is that Kamala Harris is going to win the popular vote by several million votes. But as you know, that's not the way the system works in the U.S.
Exactly.
We have this curious electoral college method whereby each state has a certain number of electors, and whoever gets to 270 electors wins.
270, so that's a sort of important magic number.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And as to that, the Las Vegas bookmakers have the race at almost exactly 50-50.
Even
today.
with just 4 weeks to go?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, fascinating. So in your type of republic, the head of state is the head of government, or at least the executive branch of government in the American system. In the constitutional monarchy system, what I'm more familiar with, is a clear separation between monarch and prime minister and parliament. Please explain the method by which Americans persuade their sitting president to stand down to make way for someone else as candidate, in this case, the vice president. Because many of us watching recent events as President Joe Biden was bundled out found the manner of his treatment puzzling, if not unfortunate and unseemly. Tell us how you saw it as an American and as a Democrat.
Well, you have to understand that this is a first in American political history.
Was it really?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was only one other instance in which a sitting president declined to run for re-election. That was in the case of Lyndon Johnson in 1968.
I remember that.
Who, in the month of March, announced that he would not be running for re-election.
So anyway, quite far in advance.
In advance,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
In this instance, we were in July of election year when President Joe Biden announced, in the form of a letter made public, that he was withdrawing his candidacy. And this came after both public and private exhortations that he do so from prominent members of the Democratic family.
That's how it would work.
That's how it did work in this instance.
In that instance, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it was the patriotic and correct thing for him to do, since it had become obvious, in particular after his most unfortunate performance at the debate on June 27th.
Exactly. He stumbled badly, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
He did. And he stumbled badly in a manner which made glaringly apparent his principal vulnerability, which is the fact of his age.
Yeah.
Because he looked and sounded like an old man.
And a lot older than Donald Trump, who was actually just not so much younger than him.
Indeed.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. Yeah. And frankly, a whole lot less coherent
yes, it's true.
than
in my
President
opinion.
Biden.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, a large part of the Democratic Party hierarchy came to the conclusion that President Biden was apt to lose.
And given the fact that it is extremely unusual for what you said, Lyndon Johnson was the only one before, did you yourself feel uncomfortable about the way it seemed on screen, or were you just fairly comfortable that because it's unusual, that was the way it would happen?
I was uncomfortable, to be honest. I think that Joe Biden had, in many respects, an admirable presidency, although there are issues on which I profoundly disagreed with the approach of the administration. On balance, he has done very well. He continues to do very well. He yet is president for another 3.5 months.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, I was uncomfortable with the idea that he was being, as you put it, bundled off the stage.
That's how it appeared anyway.
But it was necessary, and it was immediately apparent with the coalescence within 24 hours around Kamala Harris.
It happened very quickly, yes, yeah.
Whereas it really could have devolved into a chaotic mess, with 6 or 7 candidates elbowing each other at the convention for the nomination, general disarray. It was almost miraculous, the seamless way in which, within 24 hours, Kamala Harris became not only the nominee, but with a surge of enthusiasm and relief and joy and excitement.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about now. We have Kamala Harris. She is the candidate. How, in your opinion, is she performing in the campaign so far?
Brilliantly.
Yeah, that's a strong word, brilliantly.
Absolutely.
Why brilliantly? Tell us a bit, because most of us don't know who she is.
Well, most Americans didn't know who is Kamala Harris. In the American system, the vice presidency is the most invisible of jobs.
And yet a heartbeat away from the presidency.
A heartbeat away from the presidency. But there's no constitutional duty that is assigned to the vice presidency other than providing the tie-breaking vote in the event of a 50-50 tie in the Senate.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
Beyond that, the Constitution says nothing about what the vice president is meant to do.
So you're saying to me that the vice president comes in, and to a large extent, it's a clean sheet of paper. They make the job as they go along, depending on their personality and their skills and the events around them.
By and large, the vice president is dispatched to the funeral of the odd tyrant far overseas and cuts ribbons at construction sites for a new hydroelectric dam, that sort of thing. But otherwise is not apt to be in the press every day, day in and day out.
Is that Charles Adams' wry humor, or are you being really serious? I mean, tell us, what has been her track record? Because for those of us who don't know, what has she actually done in those 4 years?
Well,
as vice president?
Like any vice president, she has actually done very little. The Republicans are fond of saying that she was the, quote, border czar, unquote, which is complete nonsense.
Why is it nonsense? Just so because for those of us who don't know.
President Biden asked Kamala Harris whether she could liaise with the governments of various countries in Latin America in order to help determine what policies could be put into place in those countries in order to discourage emigration and to retain populations at home in Guatemala or San Salvador or wherever. That was what she was meant to be doing, what she in fact did. She was not a border czar in the sense of being charged with ensuring that no migrants came anywhere close to the southern border of the U.S. There is no such function. It's not an imaginable responsibility. It was not hers. And that is why I say it is nonsense to have called Kamala Harris the border czar. Okay. She was no such thing.
So, Charles, should she win on the 5th of November, what kind of president do you think she would be? I don't no disrespect to her, but it's just that her few public interviews by media that I've seen do not display a grasp of detail. There was a prosecuting attorney, and you know this because it's your profession, Attorney General of the large state of California, a U.S. senator. One would think she does have that ability to grasp detail. Does she choose not to display this grasp of detail, or do you think it's just the advice of her handlers in the way she's campaigning? Just give us some insights.
There really has not been any necessity for her to talk about the nitty-gritty, the detail of this or that particular policy, economic, fiscal, or otherwise. She is an exceedingly intelligent and capable woman who readily grasps the essence of whatever issue she is given the opportunity to study. She will not speak spontaneously about matters of which she knows nothing, unlike me, for example.
Don't be so modest, Charles.
Happy to talk about astrophysics or anything else that you'd like to chat about this morning. But seriously, she is a capable woman who will make an excellent president.
So it's part of her campaign strategy. That's understandable.
Yes.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yes, there's no need to go into the weeds if there's no particular electoral advantage to be gained from
Okay.
attempting to
And
do so.
just as an aside, and this is perhaps an unfair question to ask you, why do you think it is that American and other media refer to her origins as African American and South Asian, when, as you probably know, her father was a Jamaican who migrated to the United States, and her mother comes from Madras, what we knew as Madras as young boys, now called Chennai, Tamil Nadu, in the south of India? It seems a rather lopsided grasp of geography, or maybe it's just my personal sensitivity, having been like Donald Harris, born in Jamaica. I mean, why is that?
She's more often referred to as black than African American, actually.
Yeah.
So she is indeed a combination
That sort of
black
catch-all black,
and,
and shades of brown.
and South Asian.
Okay.
Yes. She is diverse. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's another word that is quite popular these days.
Indeed.
Let's go down that road for this conversation.
And generally non-descriptive.
Sure. No, I was just
But
curious.
she is neither a man nor a Caucasian.
No, that is true. That is true. Now, Charles, stand back from your Democratic Party sympathies and try to answer this question as disinterestedly as possible, especially for me and the non-Americans tuning in today. What is the appeal to so many American voters of a former president who is now the candidate, convicted of, I think, 34 felonies, it's the number I read, has, to put it politely, a distant relationship with the truth? According to the Washington Post, I read that Donald Trump uttered 30,573, very precise, untruths by the end of his presidency in 2021. God knows how they fact-check that number. But how can non-Americans make sense of all this?
Mike, I've been asked that question 10,000 times.
I'm sure.
And I am unable to respond to it because I myself do not understand the appeal of he whose name, by and large, is not permitted to be spoken under this roof.
Okay.
The explanation that I put forward is that in America, matters of education are not dealt with by the federal government, nor even by state governments. They're matters for localities.
Mass education.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reality is that in localities which are agrarian, rural, generally with limited means, the system of education could be described as being of a third world level.
It's a strong word expression to use.
And apt to turn out generation after generation of perfectly decent and honorable citizens who are ill-informed, by and large politically unaware or disinterested, but in the wake of the presidency of he whose name is not spoken, have felt validated in what can be a very unfortunate proclivity toward racism and misogyny and homophobia.
And they would say, make America great again.
And make America great again, yes. Which translates into make America white again, make America God-fearing in a church-going sense, return to an America which existed perhaps half a century ago or more in the minds of the population of these areas of the U.S.
So Norman Rockwell type paintings and that sort of stuff, yeah.
That's as close as I can come to coherent.
Okay, I'm not going to
explanation,
press you more on that because there are more things I want to talk to you about. But my guest today is Charles C. Adams, a former U.S. ambassador to Finland and the co-head of the global director, rather, of Orric. And he's the global director of strategic relationships of Orric, which is a international arbitration practice group. And he's based here in Geneva. Charles, I must ask you this question. He's back in Butler, Pennsylvania today. Do you believe the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, I can say his name, back in July, where the bullet appeared to clip his right ear was for real, or a piece of distasteful theater where others died as a consequence?
I think it was real. I think it was real. It's impossible for me to imagine that this could have been staged. I can understand that an onlooker might ask himself that question, given the improbability of the entire setup. But no, I think that this was a real attempt at assassination, which resulted in, indeed, death and mayhem, from which, fortunately for him, the intended victim survived.
He's an extremely lucky man.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
No, I didn't want to labour that one too much, but I just wanted to hear what you had to say. Now, my next question is really going back to education and also the bigger question of relationship between the citizens of the United States and their president. Many years ago, I remember the late, great William F. Buckley doing to tell his audience in Zurich, I was among that audience, that if a sign of a country's level of civilization is that when you ask 10 citizens in the street, who is your president, only about 1 or 2 can tell you. And then Switzerland, he said, must be the most civilized country, democracy in the world, because nobody really knows. And now my question, Charles, is this. In the vast republic, to be serious for a moment, although William Buckley, I think, was being serious, in the vast republic of the United States, about 160-odd million eligible voters from what I read, what is your assessment, your explanation of the relationship between American voting citizens and their president, their head of state? In other words, how engaged are Americans with the election of their president? Or put simply, do most Americans care? Do they go out to vote at that presidential, not state or county level? Tell us a little bit more about that as an American.
Well, let me first say that I agree entirely with William Buckley and
Yes.
his observation about Switzerland.
Yes, I thought you might.
It is indeed a very evolved society in which the ordinary citizen neither knows nor cares particularly exactly who comprise the 7-person council that's running the place.
Yes, yeah, that's my experience
And
too.
if sitting next to them on the tram wouldn't recognize them.
That's right, exactly.
I think it's one of the reasons why I am living where I am living,
Yes,
as are you.
yes, exactly. But come back to answer my question.
To answer your question, the rate of participation of Americans in presidential elections is low compared to Europe.
Give me a rough number, please.
56%, I believe.
Only half the population
yes.
of voters. Yeah.
Yes.
No.
It is thought that this year the rate of participation will be higher. And I hope it is, because the higher the rate of participation, the higher the Democratic vote.
Yeah.
Because persons who have not voted in the past typically have included young people.
Yes. And the voting age in America is 18?
Is 18.
18.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're aware that Taylor Swift has issued an appeal to all of her tens of millions of followers that they register to vote.
That must be influential.
Evidently so, since the day following, some colossal number of people actually did go and get themselves registered to vote.
There you are. Yeah.
And the overwhelming likelihood is that of those who got themselves registered, they will in fact vote on the day or in advance of the day by mail-in ballot, and are disproportionately Democratic in persuasion.
Okay.
Which is, from my perspective, a very good thing. So the higher the rate of participation, the better.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I just wasn't really sure what the level of participation, because that's really a good indicator of the relationship people have with their president, that they actually get out and put their cross on the ballot paper.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah.
And I dare say that a rather higher proportion of the population of America would be able to identify the head of state, the president, than in Switzerland.
Yes. Yes.
People identifying the current members of the Federal Council.
Yes, it's a sort of apples and oranges comparison.
Indeed.
Yeah. But now to ask you a very much more specific question, again, which maybe even puzzles Americans, let alone non-Americans, to explain the importance of the swing states in the election. Which ones are they? Why are they so crucial? Why the Electoral College procedure, which seems arcane to most non-Americans, is so vitally important. You touched on it earlier, but let's go back to it. And what do you think will happen in those swing states on the 5th of November? If you could just spend a little bit of time on that, please.
Okay, well, the reason there are such a thing as swing states is because of this Electoral College system. The equivalent of which, by the way, exists in Switzerland in the matter of referenda.
Exactly, yeah.
Which are required to be approved by a majority of cantons.
The Council of States.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas there are cantons whose population is a tenth of that of, say, Zurich.
Appenzell, Schwyz, yeah.
But who count equally when it comes to the approval of these referenda. It's exactly the same proposition. So, which are the swing states? They are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, conceivably Georgia. These are states in which, in the last several elections, the margin of decision in favor of or against the presidential candidate has been counted within small percentage points.
So geographically, they're actually quite big in the middle, but they're not large in population.
Well, Pennsylvania is large in population. Of the swing states, it is Pennsylvania that delivers the largest number of electoral votes. In fact, each of North Carolina and Michigan are substantially populated states as well.
Okay.
Within the top 15, shall we say, of the 50 American states.
Okay, yeah.
And it's anticipated that it is indeed the result in these 6 or 7 swing states that will be determinative of the Electoral College outcome.
And this Electoral College came as out of the independence of the United States in the 18th century, or did it come during the 19th century that because, I don't know, of incidences in the election of a president?
No, it's
how did it work?
It's
in the Constitution from the original times?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of the original 13 colonies.
Yes.
Having become states.
Yes.
And the idea simply was that even those colonies having become states, which are principally agricultural and had lesser population, nonetheless should have an equal say in the destiny of the nation.
I see.
At its birth. And here we are 250 years later, And does it make sense to perpetuate this system?
Well, that was my next question. Is there discussion in America about its reform, or is that basically off the table?
There has been plenty of discussion of its reform, but the reason that it's off the table as a practical matter is that amending the Constitution in the U.S. is a virtual impossibility.
I see.
Requiring a two-thirds majority of the states, and with the division as among Democrats and Republicans,
It won't happen.
There's no such thing as a two-thirds majority.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Now, Charles, I'm keeping my eye on the clock, but there are some important questions I just want to ask you before we finish. It's too serious an event to guess or speculate, but based on your long experience of watching and participating in elections for a new president, what is the process should the result be inconclusive, and what do you think the result will be on the 5th of November?
My prediction, as of today, is that Kamala Harris will be elected president and will be confronted with a Senate that will be controlled by the Republican Party.
Which is not unusual in the United States, either way round.
It has happened before, yes. In fact, it's been more the rule than the exception.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a terrible thing, since it requires a degree of collaboration.
But a little bit Swiss.
Between the executive and the legislative branches.
Yeah. I mean, you call it gridlock in America.
Well, that's one way of putting it. The other way of putting it is constructive collaboration.
Okay, good.
I still am, I've not lost hope, by the way, that the Democrats may yet end up with control of the Senate.
Well, that's my last question to you. Depending on one's political persuasion, what is the best and what is the worst that can happen on the 5th of November?
From my perspective,
yes.
The best is a trifecta. The Democrats win the White House. They preserve control of the Senate, and they regain a majority of the House of Representatives.
That's the best case.
That's the best case.
Okay, and worst case?
The worst case is the reverse, that the Republican candidate wins the presidency, that the Republicans control the Senate and the House of Representatives.
And from the intelligence that you gather with your friends and your family and all the other networks you have in the United States, can we look forward to, and I mean that in the most general and nicest way, that things will be conducted peacefully, given that you have more guns in your country than citizens?
I think, Mike, what I would say to that is the following. There needs to be a clear and decisive Democratic victory. Kamala Harris needs to be elected by a margin that is so decisive as to discourage any repeat performance of January 6th.
So Democratic with a large D, capital D, and a small d?
Both.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Otherwise, there is reason to fear that there could be a period of general mayhem and unrest, because there are plenty of people with a tenuous hold on sanity and many, many, many more firearms than there are individual citizens in the U.S., and this potentially adds up to a very toxic environment in the event of an election that is so closely decided as to be apt to be contested. And for that, I think we all need to hope that it does not happen.
I think we'd all say, and so see all of us to that, Charles. So, Charles, many thanks for answering my questions so fully as you always do, and so thoughtfully as you always do. I at least have a better understanding of some of the nuances and the complexities of your electoral system. So let the best man or woman win on the 5th of November. My guest today has been Charles C. Adams, Jr. He's Global Director of Strategic Relationships at Orric International Arbitration Practice Group and a former United States Ambassador to Finland. Thank you, Charles.
Michael, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the McKay Interview podcast, brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tyres, batteries and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. And you can find more podcasts on Anchor FM. Just Google McKay Interview Anchor FM. Thanks again for listening.